Hello, everyone, and welcome to this month's Book of the Month interview. We have with us today Lisa Wingate. I'm so happy to have her. I really appreciate you joining us, Lisa. For anyone who does not know, because I don't know, I can't imagine how you've missed this, but Lisa Wingate is the #1 New York Times bestselling author of over 30 novels, including the instant New York Times bestseller, The Book of Lost Friends, and Before We Were Yours, which remained on the New York Times list for over 2 years and has sold over 3 million copies. She is a Goodreads Choice Award winner for historical fiction and a Southern Book Prize winner. She lives with her husband in Texas. Wow, what a bio. Welcome, Lisa. We are so happy to have you here.
Oh, thank you for having me. It is so sweet. I wish I could be low countrying with the book club in person somewhere in the low country.
We wish that too. I wish we were both in Charleston, and maybe
Yes.
one day we'll get to do that. That sounds like a good thing to try to plan. So you live with your family in Texas, and I noticed in your bio that you went to elementary school, at least partly in Massachusetts. Is that where you're originally from?
That's an interesting question. I'm originally kind of from all over the place. We moved around a lot when I was little. So I was born in Germany. I'm not German. I just
Wow.
happened to be born over there. And we lived in 4 or 5 different states by the time we finally stopped somewhere, which ended up being Tulsa, Oklahoma, just randomly. My dad's career moved us around a lot, and so Massachusetts just happened to be a stop on our little train to wherever, and we were only there about 6 months. But Massachusetts is where I had the first grade teacher who made a writer out of me. So
Oh, well, we're all very grateful for that.
yes, I'm very grateful for that.
So, okay, before we dive into the prayer box, your most recent book, The Book of Lost Friends, is your 30 some odd book. Wow. 30, how many? I'm curious. And it's not just me.
Um,
Claudia Reed wanted to know too.
I think 32. Um,
Wow.
I think let's see. Before Warriors was 30. The before and after the nonfiction book that was
Right.
kind of the sequel to that
Mhm.
story was 31. So the Book of Lost Friends is 32.
You must have never, I mean, this is like you've been a writer, that was your first career, right? I mean, this is it. You've been writing books. That's been your career the whole time. Yes?
Mostly.
Yeah.
I did not have parents who thought you would be a writer for a living. I knew from the first grade, when Miss Crackhart told me I was a wonderful writer, I just knew I wanted to be a writer, and I believed in the way your first grade teacher can make you believe that I could be a writer. But I didn't come from
Wow.
that kind of a family. I mean, my family just wanted me to be able to be productively employed when I
Right.
grew
Well,
so I went to college and got a practical degree, majored in technical writing and computer science. Technical writing at the time was kind of a very emerging field. The idea that
mhm.
somebody had to write the instructions to help people understand how to use these new fancy computer machines and all that kind of thing.
That's
And so,
interesting.
yeah, so it really was a very emerging field. Anything from writing, advertising copy to literally the instructions for how to run your computer. Back then,
Wow.
it wasn't so visually self-explanatory how to use a
Right.
computer. You needed
Right.
instructions.
Other things with computers way before I ever wrote a book. So yeah, that was my first thing. That was my first productive, job where I had a paycheck or whatever.
I hear
Well,
you. It
anyway,
was an emerging industry then.
yeah,
It was
right.
growing so fast. It was a great place to be. And so, yeah, I was my very first career was about a year and a half as a technical writer, which made me get
Okay.
busy and finish writing a novel.
I hear you. I hear you. So your more recent titles seem to be historical fiction. Do you feel more drawn to that genre?
um, there's always been a lot of history in my books, even though they
Hmm.
weren't classified that way. But almost all of them have been a story of an older person revealing the secrets of their history to a younger person who's around today and what you can learn from that. And I think that's just a little bit because of that's how I grew up. We grew up
Right.
sitting at the knees of the old people who told us, how the old barn on the family farm was built, and where the railroad tracks used to be, that hump in the ground actually was where the train went through, or where the wagons went through, and where the pigs stayed and the cows lived, and what it was like. And so that always that fascination for whatever piece of ground you're standing on, what happened there before has always been in me. And I think it just comes from that very young experience of standing on those family places and hearing about everything that had happened there before with the people who came before.
Right. That's interesting. Okay. So Stephanie Brown asks, was The Prayer Box your first book to include a bit of historical fiction on his backstory? And you may have just answered that in that they all have a bit of history in them, but did it start? I mean, is every book that way, or is The Prayer Box in some way your sort of jumping off point for that?
I'm trying to think if most all of them are. My first book, Attending Roses, was a book that incorporated my grandmother's stories. And, it's contemporary fiction, but the grandmother's writing down these stories that she's never told to her granddaughter. And, they're stories with a life lesson, but they're also the life history of her grandmother that the granddaughter never knew. And that comes from life. There were stories my grandmother didn't tell. She was very ashamed of where she had come from. And she married up to a self-sustaining farmer, which in those days was marrying up. And she kind of left that piece of her history behind, that she had come from this family that was sort of the white trash in town and were very looked down on. And she grew up very poor and scrounging for food and going along the railroad tracks trying to pick up some coal so they could light the fire and keep the house warm. And, and these were experiences I never knew about because she never told about them until she happened to come and stay with me when my son was tiny. And these stories just started to pour out of her. And, and it was kind of, it changed the way I thought about life, and the way I thought about possessions and accomplishments. And, so I think every book for me is kind of still that experience of what don't you know, and what can you learn from what you don't know about the people and events that came before you.
Interesting. That's very interesting. So a little more specifically about The Prayer Box. Talk to us a little bit about the book setting. I know Hatteras Island is a real place, but is the community of Fairhope real? Or is it based on a real place? Talk to us about the setting.
Yeah, so the setting of the book, originally, when I started to write the book, I saw a big white house that had been hurricane ravaged and knew that's where the book would be set. And, it was on the seashore, of course. At the time, we had a lot of relatives a few years prior go through the hurricanes down on the Texas coast. So originally, it was set, and all the family beach houses for generations were lost and all that in those hurricanes. So originally it was set on the Texas coast in, around Galveston. And I was writing it. A dear reader friend of mine who had become sort of a reader friend / beta reader / consultant, a retired engineer, a man. Some of the sweetest readers are men who take up reading when they retire and haven't read a book in years, and they rediscover it. So when I told, during that time, the big one happened on the Outer Banks, and it took out the bridge to Hatteras and created a mess. So my friend Ed said, you've got to write a book set on the Outer Banks, because, they've had all this damage and nobody's talking about it. Everybody's talking about, New York City and stuff, but they're not talking about how the Outer Banks is going to recover. And so, I said, well, I'm working on a book right now with some, I can save the Outer Banks by writing a book about it all by myself. So anyway, then a few weeks later, Ed wrote me back and said, hey, my daughter, Susan, says, if you want to write a book, about the Outer Banks, you can come stay in the beach house.
Wow.
And so then my mind started to turn beach house, Outer Banks. I could go stay and research. And so that's how the book ended up being set on the Outer Banks, which was actually more current at the time because the hurricanes there had just happened. So I did. I went to the Outer Banks and did the research. And Fairhope is fictional. I went up and down the islands figuring out where would Fairhope be located roughly. Where would the house be located roughly? What the Outer Banks is so fascinating. What history would you include? What places would you include? It's such a diverse, long, skinny chain of sandbars out in the ocean. There's with so many stories and the lighthouses and all the ships that didn't make it through the choppy waters and all the rescues that happened. And so there was so much to tell. It became this much richer story because of the change in setting.
Wow. That's amazing. What a great opportunity to just go there and be and sort of absorb all of that and write from there. That would be amazing. I know you enjoyed that.
It was really rough duty. It was hard for me to do, but I forced myself. No, yeah. It was great. We were there
for the sake of your art.
Yeah, for the sake of my art. But we were off season, which was great because there were days when we were stayed around Duck in their beach house, and there were days when I literally went out and sat on the beach for hours, and one old hippie walked by or whatever. I could look all the way down one way, all the way down the other way. There's nobody there. It was just the best, most magical experience to be there and write the story in that spot.
Oh, that does sound magical. It makes me long for the beach. I wanted to go sit on the beach now, just hearing you talk. So was there a real house that reminded you of Iona's? Am I saying her name correctly? Iona?
Yeah.
Okay. I wasn't familiar with the name. So I was like, and you know how sometimes when you're reading, you pronounce something in your brain. And so you think that's the way it is. And then later you say it. And then someone says, oh, no, that's not the way you say that. I'm always afraid I'm going to do that with the character's name. But was there a real house that reminded you or suggested Iona's house or a museum perhaps? Or did that piece of the inspiration actually come in Texas? Was that part of the Galveston inspiration?
So here's the crazy thing. There are always some with every book. I had written draft one of a book is me telling the story to me. It's me figuring the story out. And, and I'll leave a lot of gaps and things I need to figure out and all that. So draft one really was that Galveston idea. Mm-hmm. And so I got to the end of that. Then I went to the Outer Banks. I kind of like to do location trip if I can after draft one, because then I know what I still need to know, what I need to figure out. So the White House was already in there. I had already pictured it with this kind of tower, parapet, almost castle tower thing on, just one of those very classic Victorians with the wide wraparound porch and the whole thing, only of course in disrepair. And so we went to the Outer Banks and we had done a bunch of touring up and down. And then at one point, one of the places we had not been was Manio. So we decided to go up to Old Manio. And lo and behold, we are passing through Old Manio and we pass the White Doe Inn. And it is a dead ringer for Iola's house.
Really?
Yes, look it up. It is so like, it's a bed and breakfast. So, we got to go in and walk around, and wow. So much of it was because of the era and it was like feeling the book come to life. It was so similar to her house. And, there was a saint statue out in the backyard. And I mean, it was like she lived there. It was amazing.
Oh, wow. So did you get to stay at the inn, or you went in and walked around? Did you spend the night there, or?
We did not stay the night there or anything. We didn't know it was there. We didn't, know ahead of time to even look for it. We just drove by it and went, wow. That's it.
That's it. That's amazing.
Yeah, that's it. And so anyway, it was so fun. We, they were so gracious to let us walk around, and the man who had done the gardens and the yard was for decades was there, and he talked some about the house, and so we just had this, it was just one of those amazing moments when something you've envisioned that you thought you made up comes true in real life, and life and fiction are somehow woven together in a way you never had anticipated.
I think that means you were meant to write this story.
Yes, to me, those are little God winks, little moments of serendipity that just let you know this story was meant to be this way.
Right. So Stephanie Brown says, and she has a comment and then a question. She says, you always inspire your readers to shine their lights. I have a prayer box. Sad to say, my first one was taken when we were broken into years ago. Broke my heart. But I have never thought to give one as a gift. Thank you for suggesting this in the back of the book. And on that topic, I have to say, I wasn't familiar with the idea of actually writing your prayers as letters to God. But I find that fascinating. Is this something that you grew up doing?
I did not grow up doing that. I was given, I can't really say when I first heard of a prayer. I don't ever remember not knowing what a prayer box was or not having heard of it, but I didn't have one. And a group where I went to speak gave me a prayer box as a speaker's gift. And so that really was what inspired the story. I just was sitting down, sketching out, had my idea drawer out, which is where I jot down just things that might work in a story someday. And I was kind of sketching out some ideas for a publishing company who wanted to do a contract. And I looked across the room and there was that prayer box. And I thought, what if you kept one of those, but it wasn't just one? You did one every year of your life and you saved them. What would that tell about somebody? What story would that tell? And that, the whole idea just tumbled in from there. Some stories just come all at once. And, I saw the White House and I saw this tall closet, because the White House would have these very tall ceilings. So the closets would be 14 feet tall. And, I saw these tall closets with these shelves and the prayer boxes just stacked up in the order that they had been put there. And that's where the story came from.
That's amazing. So did it come to you, did Iola come to you first? I know there's a prequel, but she's only in that very briefly in the Seaglass Sisters. So did Iola come to you first, I guess, with the house, and then the other characters came to you that are in the prequel? How did they all sort of appear to you? Elizabeth, her mother, her Aunt Sandy, and how they tied in?
Yeah. So the original story was the prayer box and the house, and the Seaglass Sisters was written after the publishing company sort of thought they'd like to have this trio of novellas that would join the stories together. The characters in the prayer box, I knew it would be about Iola, this woman who had lived a long life, and what she had to teach to this struggling young mother who comes to the house, is staying there and gets the job backhandedly of cleaning out Iola's stuff after she passes away. And so I knew that was the setup for the story. The story's always a journey for me, so I have a rough idea of how it's going to go, but there are a lot of it I'll discover on the way as I get to know the characters. So I didn't know exactly what was going to happen to Tandy or who she would meet on the islands. So how Sandy and her seashell shop came into play is kind of a fun story. So at that time, we had done a charity auction on a previous book where the winners of the auction got the chance to be named characters in a book. And then we had also done a similar thing that was just kind of a reader contest where they got the chance to name some characters in the book. So my Aunt Sandy heard about that, and she said, well, if you can put strangers in a book, then I want to be in a book. How come I haven't been in a book? And so I said, okay, yeah, you can be in this one I'm working on, set on the Outer Banks, etc. And Sandy lives on the beach in Florida, so that kind of appealed to her. So the next thing I knew, I'm getting these long emails from my aunt. So because I thought I'd make her like the clerk in the grocery store, something like that. Next thing I'm getting these long emails, and Aunt Sandy's like, okay, I'm going to be Sandy of Sandy's Seashell Shop, and here's what my store looks like, and I have a sofa over there, and I have a coffee bar, and I make these things out of sea glass. And so she invented this whole setting that was supposed to go in the book. And so then I felt pretty obligated to put it in there.
Yeah.
But what came of it was the fact that what this young woman needs, this young mother who has always tried to find her validation by, what man she's with. What she really needs is some girlfriends. She needs a community of women to lift her up, to make her strong, to get her back on her feet. And that's what she finds at the Seashell Shop. So it turned out to be the perfect addition to the story, because there's a little bit of magic in Sandy's little shop and the community of people around it.
That's interesting. Don't we all need that community of women? I mean,
oh, yes.
that's a great, that Seashell Shop and the whole community of women. I mean, I think that's fabulous. I think everybody needs that community of women. So that's wonderful. I really enjoyed that facet of the story. So next on the list, Martha would like to know, she said, I understand that ideas for books are organic in nature, but could there ever be a book about Iola's years she was in the Army? Will you revisit Iola's story?
I don't know. Anything can happen. I never know. Every book has a spark that comes along, and I don't know what it's going to be, and I don't know what's going to sort of drive a story in me. So I wouldn't say there couldn't be a book about, I don't have plans to do it, but I wouldn't say there couldn't be a book about Iola's history, because there's a lot of fascinating history of women who did amazing things during the wars and then weren't really talked about. We're getting more of it now because it's sort of a popular genre. But, I remember years ago at a book event, I sat down next to an older woman, and she was kind of sitting at the bar drinking sort of by herself, during this event. And we got to talking, and she said, she started to tell me how she was a supply pilot in World War II.
Wow.
And, and I said, gosh, that's amazing. I didn't know that women did that. And, and you should tell your story, and you should write your story or get someone to write it. And she said, oh, nobody would care about that. And it's my story anyway. I don't see why anyone would care. And, that always stuck with me, that people have these amazing histories that die with them. And that's such a shame.
Yeah, I think I would like to hear her story. That sounds amazing. I didn't know women did that either. Okay, so Sylvia Bridges says, excellent read, and I completely agree. Did you know someone that any of the characters' lives are based on? They're all so different. And the part about Tandy's mulberry-stained feet and Iola's act of kindness at the right time stands out. It made me wonder if you ever had mulberry-stained feet, or if there was an act of kindness when you were a child that stands out in your mind.
So real people, none of, other than Aunt Sandy, of course, Sandy of Sandy's Seashell Shop pretty much became my Aunt Sandy, and so, yes, she's inspired by a real person. The rest of the characters, yes and no. I mean, they're mostly fictional. I worked for years, taught Sunday school to high school seniors, and we were the big church in a small town. So we had a mix of kids. We had very privileged kids from big ranches and whatnot. And then we had the kids that were what they called the lake rats, who were growing up in the meth labs and the little bitty trailer houses out on the lake. And, and they'd all come to church there because, activities and whatever. I mean, people were nice to them, and it was somewhere they could go and get out of the house and stuff. And, so the interesting thing about having them that year is you try to pour everything into them you can, but you can't do anything about the decisions they make afterward. And some of them are going to just follow the family patterns, and some of them are going to start to work their way out of it. But it's a long, hard journey to a good life from there. And so in some ways, Tandy is those kids. The great thing about fiction is you can fix that stuff that in real life you can't make it happen necessarily like you want it to. And in fiction you can take those situations and fix them. So her life is a composite of a lot of years of young people, and watching where they went in life, and sort of the hope that they would find their way out, even if it's years later. People who poured kindness into me, well, definitely my first grade teacher, not to repeat the same story and be like one of those old uncles at the Thanksgiving table that tells the same story every year. But that moment changed how I thought about myself. A shy kid in a new school, youngest child in the family. Seemed like I never had anything interesting to say that anybody wanted to hear because everybody was beyond me, and things. And just that moment, teachers speak destiny into kids, and that little moment in this new class in Northborough, Massachusetts, just spoke destiny into me. I thought, oh, I'm a wonderful writer. I'm not shy new kid who's too afraid to ask somebody to play a board game with me at new indoor recess. I'm a wonderful writer. And then she took that and she read it to the class, and all those kids I was too shy to get to know looked at me and said, what happens next? And I was just hooked. I mean, so that is one, I guess I would say, life-changing moment of kindness. There have been many, but since we're talking about books, that one stands out.
Well, actually, someone asked about that story because, it was, we mentioned it before, but someone said, I see that a first grade teacher inspired you to write, saying that she expected to see your name in a magazine one day. Once you became a journalist, were you ever in touch with her? I hope she actually got to see your name in a magazine. So did you ever reconnect with her?
Oh, yes. So when my first book came out, Tending Roses, I tried to find her. And I'd only been in her class for about a semester. So, but I still had the report card where she wrote those, I'll see your, keep that pencil going with that wonderful imagination, Lisa. I'll see your name in a magazine one day. So that's how I knew her name, because I still had the report cards. It's back when report cards were on paper. And so I tried to find her after Tending Roses. The school was not any help. And I didn't know if she was young or old when I had her. So it was definitely possible that many years later, she wasn't even around anymore. So when the third book came out, though, The Language of Sycamores, it was dedicated to her. And a reporter in Northborough, Massachusetts, did a story on how the late Mrs. Crackhart had inspired me. So the lady in the local bookstore, see, there's a bookstore hero in this story, so I also love it. The lady in the local bookstore read the paper. Her daughter had Mrs. Crackhart just 10 years prior in the first grade, so many years later after I had her. And indeed, Mrs. Crackhart was a regular customer in the bookstore still and was not late. And so the bookstore lady connected Mrs. Crackhart to the article, and the reporter connected all of us and did an article and a retraction of the fact that Mrs. Crackhart was not late. And Mrs. Crackhart at that point was in her 80s. She's been reading the books ever since. She still does. I was able to send her the last two signed during the pandemic and got the sweetest picture back from her with the books signed to her. And so, it's such a joy to be able to go back and tell her how much difference she made. And she said she remembered me. I'm sure first grade teachers have to say that to everybody, but she said she remembered me.
I'm certain she did. I mean, she must. But you know what? My teachers, I think, recognized my imagination, but they did not come out and say, "Oh, you would be a great writer." And I wish one of them had said to me that I might have writing talent, because then I might have like taken it a little more seriously. But what they said and what they wrote on my report cards was, Susan's talents need to be channeled. I think they saw it as maybe a negative thing and not a positive thing, because I made up stories even as a small child. But, no one ever said write them down, or I would have known this was my natural career. But I went through this whole other computer thing because I didn't understand. But I love the phrase that you used a minute ago, teachers speak destiny to children. That is so true. That is so true. And I wish, oh, wow, that's so true. Teachers are very important.
Yeah.
Okay, so D. Clark says, I see that the prayer box is part of your Carolina Chronicles. Is this book part of a series? And just, I mean, I know it's part of a series, but do you revisit the main characters from the prayer box and other books in the series, or are they loosely connected by location? And in what way is this a series?
Okay.
For those of us who have not read them all.
Yes. So it's what I would call a connected series of standalone books. In other words, you could pick up any one of them and you would not know, you would not feel like you missed something by not reading the other ones. If you read the novellas and the books in order, so it's 3 novellas, 3 books, you will find old friends in the background of new books. Of course, you'll find Sandy's Seashell Shop in there doing its work with different people. And you'll find the underlying thread of one of the great mysteries of the Outer Banks, which is the lost colonists and what happened to them. One of the things that happened after the prayer box came out, I was in the bookstore in Manteo, Duck's Cottage Downtown Books in Manteo.
Oh, I love that store.
Oh, they are so awesome. So I was on the prayer box tour in that store, and it happens to be a festival night. On purpose, they had it on this festival night. And so there's fireworks down in the harbor and all these things are going on. And it's like a visit to Mayberry, because little towny kids are running around on their bicycles and stuff, coming in and out of the bookstore, hanging out and leaving. And different people are walking through. And they were all talking about, just to each other, about the Lost Colony drama that they do at the amphitheater there every year and have for generations. Because people would say, oh, yeah, when I was a baby, I was baby Virginia Dare. And, oh, well, my mother played Eleanor Dare in the Lost Colonists. And so they were all talking about that. I just got fascinated, and people would talk about what they thought happened to this group of colonists who landed on the Outer Banks and then eventually just vanished. And, just some people be like, oh, I think they went inland to Virginia through the Great Dismal Swamp. And some people would, if they were from down Hatteras way, they'd be like, oh, no, they went down to Hatteras. We found a gold signet ring buried on Hatteras just a few years ago. And, so it was, I got fascinated with that mystery of what happened to this group of people who, are dropped off on the Outer Banks, and the ships go back to resupply and whatnot, and can't make it back for some years because of wars and financing and whatever. And by the time they get back, these people have just vanished. They've disappeared. And there are a few sketchy clues about what might have happened to them, but nobody really knows, to this day. So that underlying mystery channels through the stories of what might have happened to them.
Interesting. Okay. I skipped around a little bit, so I'm scrolling. Okay. Martha Welsh wants to know, did Sandy know that Tandy was the little mulberry girl? And she references page 163. So did Sandy know that Tandy was the little mulberry girl? Did your Aunt Sandy know?
If you asked Aunt Sandy, she would say, yes, I have intuition. I would not think so, but Sandy's Seashell Shop is kind of a magical place. So, right. I wouldn't put it past Sandy to have divine inspiration into the connection of this child, this girl, to the child who was in this place many years ago.
I thought that was a wonderful way for things to kind of come around. I really enjoyed that. The Prayer Box is a sister story, at least to some degree, which I love. Do you have a sister?
I do not. I write a lot of sister stories, I think, because since I only had two mean and evil older brothers who picked on me all the time, I was always inventing imaginary playmates, many of whom were sisters. So I think, oh, okay, we have that in common. Yeah, I was the kid that they would say, Lisa, we're all going to go play in the woods. You go tell mom. And so I'd run in to tell mom. Of course, I come running back out all excited to go play in the woods with the big kids. And they'd be gone. You know how big kids are. They do that stuff. So I spent a lot of time with my imaginary friends and my imaginary sisters. And so I think that's part of the reason I write a lot of sister stories.
Right. So are Tandy and Gina based on anybody that you know at all, or are they your imaginary friends?
Well, I wouldn't really want Gina for an imaginary friend.
No, me either.
Or an imaginary sister. But their family dynamic is a lot based on having worked with young people, through various organizations, and seeing, it's so hard because it is as if the minute they get ahead a little bit, somebody they're related to is trying to sabotage them. It's as if everyone they know it's a long path uphill to something better. Everyone they know is down in the valley, and they're all, saying, hey, come back down. The party's down here, come down here. It's really hard.
I love the way you captured how conflicted Tandy was when Gina was trying to work her way back in, and she was trying to pull her back down that bad path. And Tandy was really on a good path, and she wanted to stay there, but she loved her sister and she wanted to reconnect with her, and family is family and all that. And that is such a real conflict in people who are trying to make their lives better, and yet they have family who are really not interested in doing that, but they still love their family. And I love the way you captured that. That was amazing and just felt really true. I love those characters. And I just wanted somebody to, do something for Gina to sort of, smack some sense into her or bring her around or something, because, you care about Tandy and you want Gina to be, redeemable, I guess. But how about the character of Viola? Did you have inspiration there? Anyone?
She really just came with the idea for the story. She really, I can't say any specific person that I can think of she's inspired by. She was really just part of the original vision for the story, and the woman who wrote these prayer boxes, and what her thoughts were, and what her relationship to the community might have been like. And so her history really, I don't remember ever mulling it over. I mean, it was really like she stepped onto the page sort of fully complete.
Right. Okay. So what is next for you? What are you working on now? Will that be your next book to release, or is there another in the pipeline before that?
So the one I'm working on now will be my next book to release. I have learned that when a book is in process, don't talk too much about it.
Right.
But it's kind of a turn of the century time frame, which for me is right after the turn of the century, which is not this century we're in now, but
Right. I was going to say, which one?
Yeah, I know. So it's that time frame, which I love, because my grandmother was born in 1906. So that first decade of the century is the time period she came from and that she would talk about. And and it just used to fascinate me. She came from horses and buggies and no electricity, and not indoor plumbing, and just when she saw her first motion picture, and things. I mean, just no TV, she saw a man land on the moon. I mean, just the things that happened in her lifetime are so amazing and fascinating to me. So I love that turn of the century time frame, because life is changing in every way in that time period.
Mm-hmm.
And especially for women, life is changing a lot in those decades. And,
Right.
and what women expect and how women are thought of, and they're finally about to start ditching their corsets and whatever. And, so it's such a fascinating time period to write about life in that time period, and in particular, the lives of women in that time period.
Right. Okay. Is there anything I haven't asked you that you think we should know?
Oh, goodness. I think just, not that people don't know it already, because if you're a reader, you know it, but the importance of stories and the community we build around stories. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's part of what we're missing in today's world compared to the world that I grew up in. When I was growing up, we lived in a city, but because of the way communities were structured, we knew the people in the stores where we shopped. We knew that the Texaco man who pumped our gas was my first crush, Bill the Texaco man. Bill would have lollipops in his pocket with a little patch that said Bill, and I mean, he'd come out and he knew who our teachers were in school and what we were doing. Oh, you've grown so much. And he'd give us lollipops, and you just visited. You knew you had these human connections.
Right.
And psychology tells us that we are healthier if we have, back then it was about 12 average human connections you had with someone you knew during your ordinary day. These days you can go all day and not have one or two or none. And
That's true.
I feel like books and book places and book clubs and libraries and bookstores are one of the few places where we are still doing community. We still get together and talk about ideas and talk about, just like you and I are doing, how those ideas spark our own stories from our own lives, why we care about things, because you're relating it to something in your own life. And that's so important. I guess that's the one thing I would tell people is, don't let all the easy entertainment ever make you give it up. It's one of our last bastions of what we really need as humans, which is to understand each other, to live in each other's shoes a little bit. And so I guess that's my overarching message in the world of writing and fiction and books and women, and we need that.
I absolutely agree. And that's amazing. And obviously, you are very successful at doing that. That reminds me of something that I didn't ask, but that I read that struck me as interesting. And there was an award that you received from an organization. It has to do with basically spreading kindness and understanding. And I can't remember the name of the organization, but I thought, wow, that may be the most impressive thing I know about you. I mean, that's amazing. Congratulations for that.
Thank
And what's the name of the organization? I'm sorry, I didn't.
More civility.
Right.
My favorite award ever. I mean, I treasure any award anybody wants to give me. But that one meant so much because, and that's been a number of years ago, and it seems like we lose more civility all the time. So whatever we can do to increase our understanding of each other, our desire to be civil with each other, I think is can only help. So yes, I treasure that award.
It's amazing. Everything that you write and everything that I know about you is amazing. And I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me today and to answer everybody's questions. We so enjoyed your book. And honestly, I'm going to go get the ones I haven't already read and read them now because I enjoyed it that much. It really spoke to me in a lot of ways. So I appreciate the book. I appreciate your time being here. And I know everybody is going to be excited to hear what you have to say. I can't wait to post this and have everybody chime in and give their input. But thank you so much for your time. And I guess that's everything that we have. I think that I've gotten everyone's questions in. So thank you
Oh,
again.
well, thank you for having me and for providing a place where people can get together and do community over books. Definitely. Oh, somebody will invariably ask, what order did the books if they want to read, what order did they go in? If you go to my lisawingate.com and go to Lisa's bookshelf, you can find them listed there by
Okay.
the order that they go in, so you'll know. But
All right.
anyway, yeah, thank you. Like I said, I wish we could sit on the beach and wouldn't that be great?
That would be great.
We'll talk about this stuff.
Let's do that one day.
Okay.
I will put that on my wish list.
Absolutely.
Thanks again, Lisa. Take care.
You bet. Bye.
Bye-bye.